Howdy again everyone. For many years now, the most popular focal length for a prime lens has easily been 50mm. If you're shooting on a full frame camera, then a 50mm lens gives you a lovely field of view, drawing you in with a nice emphasis on your subject, while still being wide angle enough for general use. If you're shooting on an APS-C camera, then you get the equivalent of about 75mm, giving you a tighter emphasis on your subject, making 50mm a great option for portrait photography on those cameras. Well, over the past 8 or 9 years, I've tested about 35 50mm lenses for all kinds of different systems made by Canon, Nikon, Sony, Fuji, Samyang, Zeiss, Irix and many others. And recently, my subscribers might have noticed that I've been retesting some of the very best ones on high-resolution cameras, either a 42MP Sony camera or 45MP Canon or Nikon cameras. I've been doing that deliberately so I can put together this video for you and find out what is the sharpest 50mm lens I've ever handled, and I've handled nearly all the modern ones by now. You should bear in mind that every lens you see in this video is excellent. No one in their right mind would be disappointed to own one of them. I looked at all my test results very carefully, taking into consideration the resolution, the contrast and the colour fringing of each lens at their maximum apertures and stopped down to f2, and both in the middle of their images and in the image corners. These are camera lenses of any price, and they're all full frame optics. I will name a couple of the best APS-C only 50mm lenses at the end of the video for you, for anyone who's interested. I'm also allowing a 5mm leeway here in the focal length, so I am also including 45mm and 55mm lenses, because there's a couple of interesting options there which are virtually 50mm anyway. If there is a 50mm or so lens out there that I've tested that does not appear on this video, then it just wasn't quite as sharp as these ones. You'll be able to find links to my full reviews of each of these lenses below in the description, as well as affiliate links if you want to buy one, which does go into supporting the work I do on this channel. And one final thing I'll say, these tests that I do are not the be all and end all, although I wish I could say they were. I'm extremely careful with all my tests, taking them very seriously, but a little human error can sometimes creep in there, and lenses do sometimes suffer from a little sample variation, so take a balanced perspective on what you see today, and if you're a bit of a fanboy for one particular brand of lens, then just try not to get too triggered, okay? So, coming in at number 7 is the Irix 45mm f1.4. When it came out, Irix made some pretty strong boasts about this being one of the sharpest standard lenses the world had ever seen, and it does indeed produce very sharp images with lovely looking bokeh. It only made number 7 on this list though, because when its aperture is wide open at f1.4, the lens shows a strange characteristic of being slightly soft in the middle of your pictures, but much sharper in the corners. I tested a Nikon mount version of the lens and a second Canon mount version, and they both had exactly the same image quality. The good news is though, that all you have to do is top down to f2 for some impressively sharp image quality across the entire image frame, even on very high resolution cameras. Coming close behind at number 6 is the venerable Sigma 50mm f1.4 Art. This lens has been around for a while now, and its sharpness was pretty revolutionary at the time, and its relatively affordable price has always made it a very popular option. If you test it on a high resolution camera today, you'll find it has the opposite issue to the Irix lens that I've just mentioned. The Sigma lens's picture quality is absolutely razor sharp in the middle of your images, straight from f1.4. However, the corners are a little soft at that brightest aperture, but they do pick up nicely when you stop down to f2, or a little darker. Either way, the Sigma lens's value for money has made it a firm favourite for many years, and I currently use one to do 8K video making on my Canon EOS R5. Next, the Sony Zeiss 55mm f1.8. This is a somewhat expensive lens. Remember, its maximum aperture is only f1.8, about 2/3 darker than an f1.4 lens, but it's been a really popular option for Sony users specifically. its compact size, lovely build quality and smooth bokeh make it a beautiful lens for wedding shooters, and even more than that, its images are reliably sharp from corner to corner no matter how you shoot with it. Its aperture needs to be stopped down a little if you want absolutely pin sharp image quality, unlike some other lenses at the top of this list, but still, it's a particularly beautiful option, and often testing it, I was tempted to buy one for myself. Now at number 4, and for a lot more money, we have another Sony Zeiss offering, the FE 50mm f1.4 ZA. It's a very different lens and feel to the little 55mm option, being far bigger, much heavier, brighter aperture and a slightly wider angle. But in terms of sharpness, its picture quality really is very seriously impressive. Straight from f1.4, from corner to corner, we see very good sharpness, and it's a touch sharper than the 55mm lens at the same apertures. This is definitely one of the most exciting Sony lenses I've handled, and I couldn't sing its praises highly enough when I made my review of it. Although, as I was preparing for this compilation video, I did find there are 3 other lenses out there that are just a little sharper. So let's look at those. On to number 3. And here we have Nikon's highly regarded 50mm lens for their new mirrorless Z mount cameras. Its maximum aperture of only f1.8, alongside its comparatively large size and expensive price, might have put some people off, but what you're paying for is some really incredible image quality here, straight from f1.8, with brilliant resolution and contrast across almost the entire image frame. It might be one of the slightly darker aperture lenses on this list, but it did manage to carry just a slight edge in resolution over those 2 Sony lenses at the same apertures. It's a lens that's a little ugly on the outside, in my opinion, and its sharpness is pretty clinical, but the other aspects of its image quality all pretty lovely too, make it very easy to get you beautiful images with it, and it's not too bad value for money either, its price having come down a little bit recently. At number 2, we have by far the most expensive lens on this list, the famous Zeiss Otus 55mm f1.4. It came out over 7 years ago now, and has been exciting more wealthy photographers ever since. A lot of people will say that, no matter how sharp this lens is, what counts as its rendering and colours and so on, and I found that the lens does indeed render its images in a pretty gorgeous way, although not in a way that markedly was better than other options on this list. It's impressively sharp wide open, with good contrast and low colour fringing throughout the entire image from corner to corner, but it does need its aperture to be stopped down to f2 for really pin sharp results if you're shooting on a very high resolution camera, so you might say it's just about beginning to show its age now. Well, that was number 2. Before we reach the top spot, here are a couple of the best 50mm lenses out there which are just for APS-C cameras and are not full frame compatible. I reviewed the Sony 50mm f1.8 OSS lens a while ago now, and it's really quite an old design, but aside from its useful image stabilisation, I was amazed by how very sharp it is, straight from f1.8, and even better when you stop it down a bit. It gives some very expensive lenses out there a real run for their money, so it's one of the few lenses I can equally recommend both for video work and for stills photography, if you have one of Sony's little APS-C cameras. But I do think that the sharpest APS-C 50mm lens I've ever tested so far has to be the wonderful little Fuji XF 50mm f2. It really is such a brilliant little lens for Fuji's APS-C cameras. It may not have the brightest aperture, but my gosh, its image quality really is sharp from corner to corner wide open. Just look at that detail and contrast. The whole feel of this APS-C lens is so high quality in every way that it really does have many, many happy owners. Anyway, back to the land of full frame lenses and the sharpest 50mm lens I've ever tested overall. In a way, I hate to make the winner a Canon lens, because I do occasionally get accused of being a Canon fanboy, even though I do actually criticise their lenses quite a lot, particularly for their sometimes ridiculous prices, which would be a pretty fair comment for this lens, priced at $2,500. but the RF 50mm f1.2 L USM really is an utterly incredible lens. I criticised its build quality somewhat in my review because its slightly plasticky feel isn't really becoming of such an expensive L lens, but the lens's bokeh, contrast and colours make your images fly, and most of all, its sharpness is deadly. I recently retested it on my Canon EOS R5 with its 45MP sensor, and even on that very challenging camera, it had slightly better resolution and contrast than any other 50mm lens at its widest aperture, and when you stop this Canon lens down to just f2, then it also beats all the other lenses in these tests at that aperture too. Ultimately, it was this lens's corner image quality that just about nudged it ahead of the competition here, and that's important on a 50mm lens because they can still be used for getting pictures of wider scenes. The extra bright maximum aperture of f1.2 was a little bonus as well. So there you have it. For extra entertainment, take a look down in the description below for lots and lots of angry 50mm lens owners who disagree with whatever finding I've made. But remember everyone, sharpness isn't everything. Each of these lenses is excellent, and they each have their own unique character, and the most important thing is what you do with them. What's your favourite 50mm lens you've ever handled? Let me know in the description below, and I'll see you next time. God bless.